Sebastian hit the ballroom floor with his broadsword already falling. The creature beneath him had just begun to turn. It had no time to raise its arms, no time to open the crooked seam of its mouth. Sebastian came down from the second-level balcony with all the weight of his body behind the blade. Boots striking marble a heartbeat after the sword bit into the thing's shoulder. Steel tore through dead flesh, then stopped. The impact rang like a hammer against an anvil. Sebastian felt it shoot through his wrists, elbows, and teeth. The blade had gone deep, but not deep enough. Something inside the creature had caught the edge. Not bone. Not only bone, metal. The thing lurched under him, one arm hanging loose from the hacked shoulder. Its head lolled sideways, then slowly corrected itself. The face was a badly fitted patchwork of stretched gray skin, animal jaw, and one human eye sunk deep in a bruised socket. The eye fixed on him without pain. Sebastian ripped the sword free. "Too shallow," he said. Then Halen crashed down beside him. The emberkin dropped from the balcony like a furnace stone thrown from a tower. His landing cracked the pale marble under his feet, but the floor was slick with dust and old residue. His right foot slid. The swing of his burning mace went wide, smashing sparks from a carved pillar instead of the creature's skull. The nearest creation answered at once. A tentacle uncoiled from its side with a wet snap. At the end of it was a hooked claw plated in blackened metal. It lashed toward Halen's throat. He jerked back, and the claw shrieked across the side of his head, scraping stone instead of finding the glowing seam beneath his jaw. Above them, Apple was already moving. He sprang over the balcony rail, tail catching for the briefest instant on a carved wooden vine. The ballroom opened under him in a cold wash of blue-white light. 6 creatures stood across the marble floor, no longer still, all of them waking into motion as if the room itself had commanded them. The place had once been beautiful. Even in the middle of the fall, Apple saw that. The ballroom was enormous, its second level circling above in an ornate crescent of carved wood and stone. Crystal chandeliers hung dead overhead. Tall pillars climbed into darkness, their gold leaf peeling in places, their bases crowded with statues of dancers, saints, sea beasts, and figures whose faces had been chiseled away. Along the walls, conch-shaped fixtures glowed with steady magical light, too cold to be flame. Below that light, Malrick's creations came alive. They were not alike. That made them worse. One had the torso of something broad and powerful, with 3 mismatched arms stitched into one side. Another walked on bent legs reinforced by braces, its back plated in hammered metal. One had a skull too long for its neck, and a second jaw bolted beneath the first. Another had no proper hands, only cutting hooks of bone wrapped in wire. Their bodies were meat, metal, leather straps, thread, resin, and old violence. Apple landed on the back of the creature Sebastian had wounded. His daggers were in his hands before his feet settled. He drove one blade into the seam under the thing's skull and the other beneath the edge of a shoulder plate. The first sank. The second struck something hard and skipped. Apple bared his teeth, adjusted, and stabbed again. This time the blade found a gap. The creature bucked. Apple flattened himself along its spine as a long arm swept backward over him. He hooked his tail around an iron brace in its ribs, held on, and cut into the side of its neck again and again until the thing staggered. Sebastian stepped in from the front. His broadsword rose and fell. Apple's daggers tore downward. Between them, the creature finally came apart. It collapsed onto the ballroom floor in a rush of severed cords, black fluid and clattering iron. Its skull struck the marble and split along an old seam. Apple pushed off the falling body and sprang at the next one. 2 on the left, Wynne called. His voice came from the stair, calm but sharpened. He had not jumped. He descended fast, black hair loose around his face, rapier in hand, his body half swallowed by the shadows cast from the balcony above. The creatures had waited until all 4 of them were in sight before moving. Now that mistake, or trap, was done. The ballroom was nothing but motion. Apple struck the second creation low, slashing behind its knee. The cut opened flesh. It should have dropped. Instead, his blade caught on hidden metal. "Of course," he hissed. The creature turned with an awful steadiness. Its left arm ended in a 3-pronged hook, each point filed thin and bright. It brought the hook down toward him. Wynne appeared beside it. His rapier entered beneath the jaw, angled upward, and drove through into the head. The creature seized. Apple cut again behind the knee, then across the inner thigh. Wynne withdrew and struck through the eye. This time the thing dropped. As it fell, Sebastian came in hard and brought his broadsword down across the back of its neck. The blade struck iron, bounced, then found softer matter under the reinforcement. The head half tore free and hung by strands of black sinew. The body stopped moving. For one breath, Apple thought they had control of the room. Then two more came at Sebastian. One carried a club made from fused bone and metal, grown or built around the remains of an arm. The other had blades bolted into its forearms and too many hands stitched along its ribs, each one opening and closing with insect patience. Sebastian raised his sword. The bone club struck first. He slid aside and let the blow smash into the marble. The second creature cut low. Sebastian twisted, but not far enough. A forearm blade caught the gap under his ribs and tore across him. The sound he made was short and involuntary. A gasp. Apple heard it even over the scrape of claws and the ringing of steel. Sebastian kept his feet, but blood darkened the side of his armor. Halen moved before the creatures could press him. His mace came down on the blade-armed one's shoulder, crushing the metal plate inward and forcing the thing back a step. Sebastian cut low at its leg. Halen swung high. They fell into the rhythm without speaking. Halen drove the creatures upward and back with heavy, punishing arcs. Sebastian attacked beneath that violence, chopping at knees, hips, and the places where tendons had to be. High and low, fire and steel. The creatures gave ground, but did not break. Not properly. Every blow that should have ruined them only slowed them. Every cut that should have opened bone struck some inner frame and lost force. Malrick had learned, he had watched failure, and then he had improved the next horror. A fifth creature slipped out from behind a pillar and lunged at Apple. He saw it late. Its body was long and narrow, ribs visible beneath translucent skin, head too small for its shoulders. Its hands ended in hooked talons, each one bound in copper wire. Apple dropped flat as the claws passed over him and tore a strip from his leather armor instead of opening his throat. He rolled under the next strike and came up inside its reach. Both daggers flashed. One opened the belly. The other punched into its chest and stopped against metal. The creature bent toward him. Its mouth unfolded wider than its face should have allowed. Wynne was behind it suddenly. The rapier slid between two reinforced ribs and came out through the front in a wet black point. Apple drove both daggers into its side at once. Any living body would have folded around the wounds. This one shuddered, turned its head toward Wynne, then back toward Apple. Wynne's eyes narrowed. They are reinforced internally. Apple twisted away from a claw. I noticed. Not plating, rods, braces, admire it later. The creature struck again. Apple ducked, but not cleanly. The blow clipped his shoulder and spun him half around. He caught himself on one hand and slashed across its wrist with the other. The hand loosened, hanging by thread and wire, but still tried to close around him. Across the ballroom, Sebastian and Halen were being forced back. The sixth creation had joined them. It was broad and heavy, its skin gray and stapled in overlapping sheets. One arm ended in a hammer of bone. The other split below the elbow into three narrow forearms, each holding a different blade. It struck with all of them at once. Sebastian blocked one. Halen caught another on the haft of his mace. The third drew blood across Sebastian's upper arm. They were surrounded now. The open center of the ballroom had become a killing ground around them. Every time Halen swung, one creature shifted aside, and another came in. Every time Sebastian turned to guard one angle, another opened. "Halen!" Wynne called. Halen already knew. "Back," the emberkin said to Sebastian. Sebastian did not answer. He stepped into the nearest creature instead, sword moving in a brutal circle. He hit the thing across the throat. The blade struck metal. He reversed and struck again, then again. The blows became less elegant and more necessary, each one driven by pain and refusal. The creature lifted an arm. Sebastian hacked it down. It stepped forward. He cut into the knee, kicked the leg out, and struck the neck a fourth time. Something gave. The creature collapsed in a heap of meat and iron. "Back," Halen said again. This time Sebastian obeyed. They retreated toward the wall, giving up the center of the ballroom. Halen placed himself near one pillar. Sebastian took the space beside him, breathing hard through his teeth. The wall protected one flank. A fallen table blocked another. It was not safety, but it was shape, and shape mattered in a fight. Wynne lifted his left hand. The creature between him and Apple hissed through stitched lips and lunged. The air around Wynne darkened. There was no blaze, no flourish, no bright theatrical spell. The shadows around his fingers tightened as if drawn through a needle. He spoke one word too softly for Apple to understand. The magic struck the creation through the chest. It did not cut like steel. It did not care about steel. Black lines opened from inside the creature. Flesh split. Hidden rods bent and tore loose. Reinforced ribs cracked outward, as if the darkness had found the spaces between every piece of it and pulled. The thing came apart in a wet, collapsing scatter. Apple stared despite himself. "Useful," he said. Wynne's face was pale with effort. "Against these, yes." Apple looked toward Halen and Sebastian. Two creations remained upright. Both were turning toward the wall where the others had made their stand. One had its back to Apple. The other circled wide, angling for Sebastian's wounded side. Apple ran. "Halen!" he shouted. "On your back!" Halen did not turn. He braced. Apple hit him at full speed. One foot found the back of Halen's calf. The next struck a ridge of stone at his hip. Heat rolled up through Apple's legs. His tail snapped around Halen's shoulder for balance, and he ran up the emberkin's back as if climbing a burning cliff. Halen leaned forward just enough. Apple launched over him. For an instant, he hung above the nearest creature, upside down, daggers pointed toward its spine. Then he dropped. Both blades sank into its upper back. Again he felt the internal rods. Again he adjusted, seeking the seams. He dragged the daggers down with all his weight, opening the dead flesh around the reinforcement. The creature jerked and flung one arm backward. Apple hit the floor behind it, rolled under the blind swing, and cut across both knees. "Apple!" Sebastian warned. Apple turned. The last creature had abandoned Sebastian and come for him. It was faster than something that size should have been. Its hammer arm swept sideways, not clean, not precise, simply heavy. Apple tried to duck under it. He was too slow. The blow caught him across the ribs and shoulder and lifted him from the floor. He struck the marble hard enough that the room flashed white. For a moment there was no air, no sound, no body below his neck. Then everything returned at once, and all of it hurt. His dagger rang away across the floor. His mouth opened, and the cry came out before he could stop it. Sebastian looked over. The creature in front of him took advantage of the break. Its hammer arm came down. Sebastian got his sword half raised, but the blow smashed through his guard and struck him across the chest. Metal screamed. He was driven back into the wall. His head hit stone. His knees nearly failed. Halen roared. The sound shook dust from the balcony. The glow inside the cracks of his body flared brighter, orange and white beneath black stone. He swung his mace with both hands and caught the hammer-armed creature in the side. This time the blow landed clean. The creature folded around it. Ribs burst. Metal rods tore loose and spun across the floor. The thing staggered into Sebastian's reach. Sebastian pushed off the wall. His face had gone bloodless. His sword shook in his hands. But he stepped in and drove the blade through the creature's throat. The edge caught. Sebastian leaned his weight behind it and forced the sword through anyway. The head came half free. Halen's next blow smashed it the rest of the way from the body. Wynne reached Apple and stood over him as the final creature lurched around. "Can you move?" Apple coughed. Blood touched his tongue. "I hate that question. Move." Apple found his fallen dagger with his tail. His fingers tightened around the other. The last creation came on all fours now, though it had not been built for it. Blades and claws scraped furrows into the marble. Its body trembled from the damage Apple had done to its back, but the reinforcement still held it together. Wind gathered shadow again, slower this time. The creature lunged. Apple rolled beneath its first claw as Wind released the spell. The dark strike tore across the creature's side. Flesh split. The rods beneath bent and flashed into view. It was not enough to kill it, but enough to wreck its balance. The creation crashed shoulder first into the floor. Apple came up beside its head. Halen's mace descended onto its spine. Sebastian's sword followed. Apple drove both daggers into the throat and pulled outward. The creation convulsed beneath them. Halen struck again. Wind's rapier pierced the eye. Sebastian chopped through the ruined neck. At last, the thing stopped moving. Silence settled over the ballroom in pieces. First the scraping stopped, then the wet twitching, then the echoes. Only their breathing remained. Apple stayed on one knee with one hand clamped against his ribs. Breathing felt like swallowing knives. He did it anyway. The other choices were worse. Sebastian slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, broadsword across his lap. Blood soaked into the torn side of his armor. The front of his breastplate was dented inward where the hammer had hit. His jaw was clenched so tightly Apple could see the muscle jumping. Halen stood among the bodies, mace lowered, chest rising and falling like a bellows. The heat in him dimmed slowly, but not all the way. Wynne wiped his rapier clean on a strip of dead flesh, then crouched beside one of the corpses. No one asked if everyone was all right. None of them were. They were harder to kill, Sebastian said at last. His voice was dry and strained. Yes, Wynne said. He used the tip of his rapier to pull back a flap of torn skin. Beneath it, the bone had been drilled through. An iron rod ran along the length, fastened with tiny clamps and dark resin. Wynne leaned closer. Apple saw the expression on his face and scowled. Do not look impressed. I am not impressed. You are... Wynne ignored him. He reinforced the skeleton. Not merely outer plating, internal support. The rods distribute force. A blade can damage the flesh without compromising the structure. Sebastian gave a short, humorless breath. That explains why cutting them felt like chopping through furniture. Furniture does not strike back, Halen said. No, Wynne said. And this articulation is new. See the shoulder? Multiple grafted ligaments anchored to the brace. Crude, but effective. Apple forced himself to his feet. Pain tightened around his ribs, sharp enough that he had to stop and breathe through it. Crude, effective, horrible, dead. He looked at Wynne. Choose the useful word. Wynne let the flap of skin fall back into place. Dead. They made sure of it. Halen broke the bodies apart with deliberate, ugly force. Sebastian cut through wrists, throats, and joints wherever anything still looked too connected. Apple retrieved his dagger and wiped it clean with a shaking hand. Wynne watched the corpses with the wary patience of a man who trusted neither magic nor death when Malrick had touched both. Only after the last creation lay in pieces did they search the room. The ballroom had been converted into a workshop, or a gallery, or a holding room, perhaps all three. Along one wall stood shelves dragged in from elsewhere, packed with books and ledgers. Long tables held jars of cloudy fluid, brass instruments, leather straps, sealed boxes, rolled diagrams, bone saws, needles, clamps, and tools too delicate to be meant for anything merciful. Several books on the shelves carried a faint magical pressure, like a hum just under the skin. Wynne stopped before them. Apple saw the pull in his face. Magic? Sebastian asked. Yes, Wynne said. How many? Several. Halen stepped closer. Leave them, Wynne glanced at him. For now, Halen said. Until we know, the rest of this place is empty. For a moment, Wynne looked as though he might object. His eyes moved over the shelves, measuring the bindings, the old leather, the faint shimmer of spellwork. Then his gaze shifted back to the ruined creatures spread across the marble. He closed his hand. For now, he said. The conch lights along the walls continued to glow with their cold, steady light. They showed everything clearly, the cracked marble, the broken bodies, the blood on Sebastian's armor, Apple's careful breathing, the blackened head of Halen's mace, Wynne's thoughtful stare. The ballroom had once been made for music. Now it only held the remains of what Malrick had taught to dance. Scene 2. They left the ballroom slowly. No one said it aloud, but all four of them moved like people expecting the dead things behind them to remember one last instruction. Halen went first, mace in both hands. Sebastian followed close, broadsword drawn, though every few steps his left hand drifted toward the place where blood had soaked through the gap in his armor. Apple kept near the wall, one arm folded tight across his ribs. Wynne came last. The conch lights continued down the hallway. They were set into the walls at regular intervals, each one nestled in a carved alcove of curling stone, each shell glowing with the same cold blue-white light as those in the ballroom. The magic did not gutter. It did not smoke. It did not leave soot on the ceiling. It made the passage bright enough to see every crack in the walls and every smear their boots left in the dust. The hallway was beautiful. That made it worse. Apple had expected tunnels under the city, cellars, brick drains, damp stone, roots pushing through walls, places where rats and mold had been the first tenants, and men like Malrick had only moved in after the darkness was already accustomed to sin. This was not that. This was a house, not a house, perhaps, a manor, a palace buried under other streets and other years. The corridor stretched wide enough for 4 people to walk abreast. The walls were paneled in dark wood between sections of carved stone. The ceiling arched overhead in shallow ribs painted with faded constellations and seabirds. Dust lay over everything, but beneath the dust was care, craft, money, time. A long carpet ran beneath their feet. Once it must have been red, though age had dulled it toward wine-dark brown. Gold thread ran through it in patterns of waves, branching trees, and strange geometric knots. Even worn and dirtied, it was finer than anything Apple had stepped on since he had been dragged out of the jungle. Sebastian noticed it too. He paused near a carved support where the wall opened into a shallow recess. A statue stood there, life-sized, hooded, and faceless, holding a basin in both hands. Someone had filled the basin with polished stones, or perhaps they had once been offerings. "This would not look out of place in West Haven," Sebastian said. His voice was low, still rough from the fight. Apple looked at him. "That sounds expensive." "It is." Halen's gaze traveled over the wall, the carpet, the statues. "Then why is it under the city?" Wynne stopped beside one of the alcoves and studied the faceless statue. "Because someone wanted it hidden," he said. "Or someone wanted what was above it to forget what was below." They continued. The statues changed as they moved deeper. At first they were noble figures robed and solemn, hands clasped over hearts or extended in gestures of welcome. Then came stranger things, a woman with the lower body of a fish and a crown of antlers, a man with 4 eyes each looking in a different direction, a child holding a knife behind its back, a knight kneeling before an empty chair, 2 figures embracing, though one had no head and the other had too many hands. Apple did not like the statues. He did not like the way their blank eyes seemed more honest than faces would have been. "Do these mean something?" Halen asked. "Probably," Wynne said. "That is not an answer." "It is the only safe one." Sebastian glanced into an open doorway as they passed. "Study." Halen shifted toward it at once. The room beyond was smaller than the ballroom, but still large enough to swallow most common houses. Shelves lined 3 walls. A desk stood at the center, its surface cleared except for a brass lamp, a dried ink pot, and a knife whose blade had gone black with age. A ladder on rails reached the upper shelves. Dust lay thick on everything. Wynne looked in from the threshold, then shook his head. "No fresh tracks." "Books?" Apple asked. "Books," Wynne said. "Magic?" Wynne's gaze narrowed slightly. "Some. Not strong." Halen turned away. Later, they moved on. Another door opened into what might have been a receiving room. Chairs with high carved backs sat along the walls as if waiting for petitioners who had never been called. The upholstery had faded to gray and split at the seams. Above the cold hearth hung a painting so dark with age that Apple could only make out the suggestion of a pale hand resting on the arm of a chair. The next chamber had no furniture at all, only statues, dozens of them. Small ones crowded the floor, tall ones stood against the walls. Some were carved from white stone, others were black wood, a few were bronze, green with age. None showed ordinary people. One statue had a man's torso and the legs of a heron. Another was a cluster of 3 women joined at the shoulder, all with their mouths covered. A third looked like a monkey, but not a Semaya. Its back was too long, its eyes too sunken, its hands folded in a mockery of prayer. Apple stared at that one longer than he meant to, then he moved on. No one asked why. The hallway bent twice, then descended a short flight of stairs and opened into a circular room with 3 machines standing under the conch light. Apple stopped. For a moment he forgot his ribs. The machines were taller than Halen and nearly as broad. Each stood on a round base of dark polished wood bound in brass. From the base rose rings, not simple rings, but dozens of them, interlocking and crossing through one another at angles that should have made movement impossible. Brass hoops, steel bands, carved wooden arcs, thin rods tipped with ivory. Small weights hung from chains. Needle-like pointers extended from nested circles, each aimed at symbols etched along the inner edges. At first glance they looked like orreries, the sort of device scholars use to model moons, stars, and wandering lights. But these did not show the heavens. Their rings were too close, too crowded, too deliberately obstructed. Each ring was interrupted by locks, latches, spring-loaded pins, sliding bridges, and little doors no wider than Apple's thumb. One had 6 concentric spheres that turned inside one another, each with narrow slots where rods could pass through only if aligned with impossible precision. Another had flat rings arranged vertically, like a series of gates, each one marked with symbols that shifted when touched. The third was built around a central column covered in tiny levers, all of them connected to hooks and catches hidden inside the surrounding bands. Sebastian leaned in slightly. "What are they?" Apple did not answer. He walked closer, his tail lifted behind him, slow and intent. Wynne noticed first. "Apple!" Apple reached toward the nearest machine, then stopped before touching it. He circled instead, eyes following the path of rods, catches, release pins, and counterweights. His face had gone very still. "This is Samaya work," he said. Sebastian looked from him to the device. "From Rue." "No," Apple's voice sharpened. "Not from Rue." He moved to the second machine, then the third. The longer he studied them, the less he liked them. They copied the principles, he said, badly in some places, cleverly in others. "Locks?" Wynne asked. Apple nodded once. "Temple locks, vault locks. Not exact. These are not real locks. They are teaching devices." Halen came closer, careful not to touch. "Teaching what?" Apple's tail twitched. "How to open what was not made for your hands." The room seemed colder after that. Sebastian frowned. "Explain." Apple pointed with one dagger, though he did not draw it fully. "A Samaya lock is not only about the hand, it uses the tail, sometimes the feet, sometimes balance, pressure in 3 places, movement in 2 more, release in another. Not all at once, not always, but enough that someone with only 2 hands has trouble." "Trouble," Sebastian said. Apple glanced at him. "Impossible, if the lock is well made." Wynne stepped around the nearest orrery, studying the rods. "And these?" "These are for humans trying to learn the motion without a tail." Apple pointed to a long brass arm attached to the side of the frame. "That replaces a tail press. Poorly. This sliding bridge lets one motion hold while another hand moves on. That little clamp holds tension. That weighted lever creates a delay." He circled again. Someone was building a way to cheat the lock. No one spoke for a few seconds. The hidden rooms, the preserved elegance, the dead ballroom, the reinforced bodies. It had all been wrong, but in a way they had already begun to understand. Malrick made monsters. Malrick improved monsters. Malrick left rooms full of tools and books and stitched flesh. This was different. This felt aimed. Apple laid his hand against the edge of the machine. The brass was cold. "Can you open it?" Wynne asked. Apple's first instinct was to say yes. His second was to say nothing. He chose the third. "I can try." Halen looked back toward the hallway. Quickly, Apple gave him a look. "That is not how this works." Then carefully, "That is better." He set both hands on the nearest machine. The first ring turned easily. Too easily. It clicked twice and stopped. Apple's left hand held it in place while his right found a narrow latch near the base. He pressed it. Nothing happened. He frowned, then bent closer and saw the small brass bridge tucked under the inner ring. "Ah," he muttered. "You want 3." He put one foot against the base to brace himself, used his left hand to hold the outer ring, his right to press the latch, and his tail to curl around the brass arm that was pretending to be a tail. The arm resisted. Apple's mouth tightened. He pulled with his tail, pushed with his hand, and shifted his weight. Something inside the machine clicked. A narrow rod slid free. The outer ring loosened. "There," he said. Sebastian watched despite himself. "That was the first step?" "Yes. How many are there?" Apple looked over the machine. "Many." Wynn's eyes moved to the door, then back. "We should not stay long, I know." Apple kept working. The device fought him in a way he found almost insulting. Not because it was crude. Crude would have been easier to dismiss. It was not crude. It was wrong in specific, thoughtful ways. Whoever had made it had watched Semaya mechanisms closely enough to understand the problem, but not closely enough to respect it. They had reduced grace to a set of substitutions: a clamp for a tail, a delay lever for balance, a sliding brace for the pressure of a foot against stone. The result was ugly, but it was not stupid. Apple slid one latch to the left, then back to the right, then halfway between the two. The ring above it turned a finger's width. He used his tail to hold the brass arm down while both hands worked 2 ivory-tipped rods through a pair of crossing slots. One rod had to pass through first, then retreat, then let the second rod take its place. He saw the logic just before the machine trapped him. A pin snapped down toward his finger. He jerked back. The pin struck brass with a hard click. Apple hissed. "Trap?" Sebastian asked. "Training bite," Apple said. "Meaning?" "Meaning someone wanted students to keep their fingers." He reset the outer ring, moved the rods again, and this time caught the release before the pin dropped. The inner bands shifted. 3 small windows opened in the central column, revealing painted symbols, a crescent, a branch, and an eye. Apple's face changed. Wynn saw it. "What? Those are not Semaya symbols. What are they?" "I do not know," he continued. "The final sequence required both hands, tail, and teeth." Apple did not like giving the machine the satisfaction, but there was no other way. He held a thin cord between his teeth and pulled it just enough to tension a hidden catch while his tail held the false tail arm, and his hands rotated 2 inner rings in opposite directions. His ribs screamed at him. He ignored them. The machine clicked, then clicked again. Then the whole central column opened like a flower. A hollow space waited inside, just large enough for a scroll case or a narrow blade. It was empty. Apple exhaled. For the first time since entering the room, he looked impressed, not happy, but impressed. "They got close," he said. Wynn stepped nearer. "How close?" Apple looked at the open device. "Close enough that I do not like it." Sebastian stared into the empty compartment. "Could this open locks at Rue?" Apple's gaze stayed on the machine. "No," he said. Then, after a moment, "Not the best ones." That answer settled badly. Apple moved toward the second orrery. Wynn caught his arm, gently but firmly. "We need to clear the rest of the structure." Apple looked at the hand on his arm. Wynn released him. "There are 2 more," Apple said. "I see them. They may be different. Likely." Apple's tail lashed once. "I can do them. I believe you." That made it harder to argue. Halen turned toward the doorway. "Then we return when it is safe." Apple stared at the second machine. Its rings waited, interlocked and unreadable. Somewhere inside it there would be another sequence, another theft of old craft, another answer to a question he did not want anyone asking. Finally he stepped back. "Fine." Sebastian gave him a brief look. Not pity, Not curiosity, something closer to recognition. The look of a man who had just read a threat written in someone else's hand. They left the room. The corridor beyond continued deeper into the hidden house. The carpet changed here, its patterns shifting from waves and trees to a repeating design of black birds stitched in dark thread. More dust lay along the edges, but the center showed signs of recent passage. Not much. A smear here, a scuff there. Enough. They followed it. One door opened into a bathing chamber with a sunken pool lined in blue tile. The water was gone, but the tiles still showed a procession of painted fish and white flowers. Another room held narrow beds arranged in rows, each one made with linen that had yellowed but not rotted. A dormitory, perhaps, or a ward, or a place where servants had once slept before Malrick turned the house into something else. Apple kept thinking of the machines. He did not like that humans had made them. He liked less that humans had needed to. The hallway widened as they moved on, then opened through a pair of carved double doors into a large room lit more warmly than the rest. Not firelight, but something close to it. The conch fixtures here glowed amber, not blue-white, and the air carried a smell so unexpected that all of them stopped. Food. Not old food, fresh food, salted meat, fruit, bread, cooked roots, something sweet with honey, something roasted, something recently torn apart. Halen raised his mace. The room beyond looked like a dining hall, though it had been altered into a feeding chamber. Long tables stood in rows, but only one near the center was in use. Platters and bowls had been piled there in a heap. Some were overturned, some had been cracked open. The food was not arranged for a meal, it had been dumped for consumption. The thing eating from the table lifted its head. It was one of Malrick's creations, but not like the others. This one had been built low and long, on 4 legs, with a stretched reptilian body and a hide made of overlapping scales, stitched leather, and patches of bare muscle. Its head was lizard-like, narrow and long, but the eyes were wrong. One yellow and slit-pupiled, the other dark and mammalian set too far forward. Its jaw opened sideways at the back, giving its mouth too much width. A thick tail dragged behind it. At the end was a heavy knob studded with metal spikes like a morning star grown from bone. Each foot was different. One ended in talons like a hunting bird. One in a split hoof sharpened and capped with iron. One in a paw fitted with hooked blades. One was almost human, except the toes had been replaced by curved knives. It hissed at them. The sound filled the room like steam escaping a cracked pipe. Halen did not wait. He strode to the nearest table, seized the edge with both hands, and flipped it. The whole table heaved upward. Platters, bowls, jars, bread, meat, and fruit flew into the air. The lizard thing scrambled for footing as the surface bucked beneath it. Its claws tore grooves through the wood. For half a heartbeat it hung crookedly on the rising table. Then it fell. It hit the floor hard on its side, tail smashing through a chair as it came down. "Now," Sebastian said. The creature rolled faster than its size allowed. Its head snapped toward Halen. The jaws opened. It struck for his leg. Teeth clashing shut on empty air as Halen dragged his foot back. The bite would have taken half the limb from a man. Against Halen it might not have severed stone, but Apple had no desire to learn what those teeth had been made to do. Apple ran right. A fallen table lay between him and the creature. He ducked behind it, ignoring the pull in his ribs, and pressed himself low. From there he could see under the table legs, Halen's feet, Sebastian's boots, the creature's claws scraping for traction. Wind stayed near the door, eyes half narrowed. "Do not let the tail swing wide," he said. The creature reared. For a moment it rose on its hind legs, front claws unfolding like 4 separate weapons. It struck Halen and Sebastian at the same time. One claw raked across Halen's chest, throwing sparks from stone. Another caught Sebastian across the shoulder, tearing through leather and scoring the metal beneath. Sebastian grunted and staggered 1 step. Halen caught the next claw on the haft of his mace. Apple moved. The creature's weight was forward. Its back was exposed, ridged with stitched plates and uneven scales. Apple sprang from behind the fallen table, hit the edge, and launched himself onto the thing's tail. The Morningstar knob jerked beneath him. He nearly lost his grip. His tail wrapped around one of the spikes, pain flaring where metal bit fur and skin. He climbed anyway. The creature felt him. It thrashed. Apple flattened himself along its back as the tail smashed sideways and shattered another chair. He drove one dagger into a seam between two plates. It held. He used it as a climbing spike and hauled himself up, then set his feet against the ridge of its spine and ran. The creature snapped at Halen again. Halen held it at bay. Sebastian cut into one of its forelegs. His blade bit deep, and this time there was less resistance than before. Not none, but less. The lizard thing shrieked and twisted. Apple reached the base of its neck. Both daggers rose. He drove them down together into the side of the throat, just behind the jaw. This time he found the place. The blades sank to the hilts. The creature convulsed under him. Its front legs buckled. Apple ripped the daggers outward and opened the side of the neck in a black flood. The lizard thing slammed down hard enough to throw him forward over its head. Sebastian struck as it fell. His broadsword carved into the opened wound. Halen's mace came down on the skull. The first blow cracked it, the second crushed it. Wind's shadow moved across the floor, but he held the spell. There was no need. The creature's tail whipped once, smashing the leg from a table. Then it lay still. Apple rolled onto his back and stared at the ceiling. "I dislike this house," he said. No one laughed. That was fair. Halen stepped over the dead creature and began breaking its legs one at a time with the mace. Sebastian leaned against a table and pressed his hand to his shoulder until the bleeding slowed. Wind crouched near the body, not touching it, studying the head, the claws, the tail. "Different design," Wind said. Apple sat up with effort. "Still dead? Yes. Then I like this design better." Wind's gaze shifted toward the food scattered across the floor. This one was being fed. Sebastian looked at the table. Recently, the room smelled too alive for the place around it. Torn bread, split fruit, meat still soft enough to glisten. A jar of honey had shattered across the floor, and its sweetness cut through the blood stink in a way that made Apple's stomach clench. Halen turned slowly, looking over the room. "Who feeds it?" No one answered. They searched, carefully first, then more thoroughly once Wind found no immediate threat. The dining hall connected to a pantry, a cold room, and a narrow preparation chamber with counters of stone. The knives hanging on the walls were ordinary kitchen knives, though Apple no longer trusted ordinary things in Malrick's house. The pantry shelves were full, not with old ruin, not with rat-chewed sacks and spoiled grain, full, salt, dried apples, barrels of flour, preserved meat, jars of oil, honey, vinegar, root vegetables packed in sand. Bundles of herbs hung from the ceiling, their leaves still fragrant when brushed. Wrapped rounds of hard cheese sat under waxed cloth. Smoked fish hung in a side chamber. Sebastian stared at it all. This should have spoiled. Wind lifted a hand, then slowly turned in place. "Utility magic," he said. Apple looked at him. "Meaning?" "Preservation, warding against rot, possibly against insects. The room is layered with small spells." "Small?" "Small does not mean simple." Wynne walked into the pantry and stopped before the far wall. He touched the edge of a shelf, then the air just above it. "Another one here. Stronger." Halen stood in the doorway, too large for the pantry by half. "Dangerous?" "No. Functional. It keeps these stores from turning." Apple looked over the shelves. His eyes caught on a small ceramic jar near the back of the second shelf. It was sealed with wax. He moved toward it. The others were occupied. Sebastian was checking a barrel of salt. Halen had found a sack of dried roots and was sniffing it suspiciously. Wynne was studying the preservation spell with more attention than Apple thought any shelf deserved. Apple pulled the jar forward. He cracked the wax with the tip of a dagger and lifted the lid. Inside were sugar cubes, 6 of them. Perfect, white, sharp-edged little blocks. For a moment the room changed. Not literally. He was still in the pantry. His ribs still hurt. The smell of blood still clung to him. The dead lizard thing was still cooling in the other room. But he saw Dunmere, a tavern table, green myrtle wood in a glass, a slotted spoon, water dripping slowly over sugar. The strange bitterness opening into something almost sweet. A ritual so unnecessary and exact that it had lodged itself in him like a useful little splinter. He looked at the sugar cubes. Then he looked back at the others. No one was watching. He wrapped the cubes in a scrap of clean cloth and tucked them carefully into his pouch. Not quickly, reverently. When he turned back, Win was looking at him. Apple froze. Win said nothing. Apple narrowed his eyes. Win turned back to the shelf. Sebastian emerged from the pantry carrying salt and a small jar of honey. "There is enough here to make camp without opening our own supplies." "Take what travels," Halen said. "Not too much." Apple coughed once and immediately regretted it. "Salt travels. Honey travels," Sebastian said. "Sugar travels," Win added, without looking over. Apple gave him a flat stare. Win's mouth did not move. Not quite. They gathered what they could use: salt, honey, dried fruit, a little flour wrapped tight, and herbs that had not lost their scent. Halen took a small sack of roots after deciding they were food and not some preserved experiment. Sebastian checked every jar before handing it over, as if expecting one to contain eyes. Apple avoided the central table as they left. The dead lizard thing lay beside it with its skull crushed open, its mismatched feet curled inward, its morning star tail still wrapped around the splintered remains of a chair. The food scattered around it made the whole room feel less like a battlefield and more like an interrupted feeding. Someone had kept it alive. Someone had expected to keep doing so. Back in the hallway, the conch lights waited in their carved alcoves. The carpet swallowed their footsteps. Behind them, the dining hall settled into silence. Apple touched the pouch at his side once, checking the sugar cubes by feel. Then he followed the others deeper into the house. Scene 3. They made camp in the room with the books. None of them called it camp at first. Camp belonged to trees, stones, mud, wet cloaks, and the uncertain mercy of weather. Camp belonged to watch rotations under open sky and the small calculations of smoke, fire, wind, and cover. This was something else. This was 4 exhausted people choosing the least terrible room in a buried house full of dead things. They returned to the chamber beyond the ballroom, only after clearing the nearest halls twice. And even then Halen did not trust it. He stood in each doorway with his mace in both hands and looked into corners that had already been searched. Sebastian did the same, though his movements had slowed. The blow to his chest had left him tight around the mouth. Every breath drew something from him. Wind set warning charms on the doors behind them. He worked quietly, crouched near the threshold, one hand against the floor, the other drawing a thin line in the dust with the tip of a knife. He did not use chalk or powder. He spoke under his breath, then pressed 2 fingers to the wood beside the frame. The air there stayed inward for a moment, as though listening. Apple watched him from near a table. "What does it do?" Win did not look up. "It tells me if the door opens." "How? I will hear it." "With your ears?" "With enough of me." Apple considered that answer, decided he disliked it, and sat down on a crate. His ribs objected. He sucked air through his teeth and held still until the pain steadied into something he could think around. The armor across his side had torn where the creature's blow had caught him. The leather had taken some of the force. Not enough. It never took enough. He began unfastening the damaged straps with stiff fingers. The room they had chosen might once have been a private library or a lesser study. It sat off the ballroom through a pair of paneled doors and had no other obvious entrance. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, interrupted only by 2 narrow windows that looked onto black stone instead of sky. The windows were false or buried, or had once opened into some courtyard long since sealed away. Now they reflected the cold light of the conch lamps and gave nothing back. A long table stood at the center of the room. Books had been stacked across it in uneven piles. Some were old enough that their leather covers had cracked. Some were newer, bound in waxed cloth or stitched hide. Several gave off the faint pressure of magic, the sort Apple could not sense directly but could see in Win's attention. Halen set his mace near the center of the floor. The head of it still burned, not properly, not like wood, not like oil, not like anything that consumed itself. Flame gathered around the metal head in a low, steady curl, red, orange, and gold. It threw light across the room, and only a little heat. The fire did not scorch the carpet. It did not blacken the floorboards. It simply burned because Halen wished it to burn, or because the mace remembered the forge from which it had come. It made the room feel almost survivable. Halen crouched beside their small collection of food. The motion made stone joints grind softly. He took a dented pot from Sebastian, set it against the floor near the mace, and held one hand beneath it. The cracks across his palm brightened. Heat rose from him in a shimmer. The stew inside the pot began to steam. Apple watched with open irritation. "You can cook with your hand." Halen looked at him. "Yes. You have been able to do this the whole time?" "Yes." Apple stared at him for a moment, then returned to his armor. "I hate everyone." Sebastian lowered himself into a chair with care. It was too elegant for the moment, high-backed and carved along the arms with curling leaves. He looked like a wounded statue placed there by mistake. He had removed the worst bent portion of his breastplate and set it on the floor beside him. The dent across it was deep enough to hold water. "Your hatred is becoming less selective," Sebastian said. Apple pulled a needle through torn leather. "It is more efficient that way." No one laughed much. The room did not invite laughter. Wynne finished the last warning charm and stood. "The doors are set." "All of them?" Halen asked. "All the useful ones." Halen looked at him. "All of them," Wynne amended. Only then did Halen sit. They ate because they had to. The food from the pantry was too good for the house it came from, and that made it difficult to trust. But hunger was hunger. Sebastian cut hard cheese with a knife and passed it around. Halen crushed dried herbs between his fingers and stirred them into the pot. Apple tore bread into small pieces and ate slowly, avoiding deep breaths. Wynne took less than the others, as usual, but he did eat. Sebastian uncorked the Dunmere whiskey. The bottle passed from hand to hand without ceremony. Apple drank first and coughed. Pain stabbed through his ribs. He glared at the bottle as if it had betrayed him. "That is worse than I remember," he said. "It is exactly as bad as I remember," Sebastian said. Halen drank and seemed unaffected. "It has strength." "That is one word," Apple said. Wynne took the bottle last. He drank, closed his eyes briefly, and handed it back. The whiskey warmed them more honestly than the mace fire. It settled low and rough in the stomach, burned through the cold left by the halls, and made the silence easier to endure. Not comfortable. Nothing here was comfortable, but easier. Apple worked on his armor by the burning mace. His hands were clever even when bruised. He cut away the worst of the torn leather, punched new holes, and threaded spare cord through a place where stitching had failed. He had done this kind of repair in worse places, under worse light, with less time. Still, every pull of the cord tugged at his ribs. After the third sharp breath, Halen reached across without speaking and held the edge of the leather steady with two stone fingers. Apple glanced at him. Halen did not look back. Apple kept sewing. Sebastian cleaned the cut along his side with whiskey and a strip of cloth. He did it without flinching until the cloth pressed too deep. Then his jaw tightened and his breath caught. He waited for it to pass, then continued. That was Sebastian. Pain was allowed only after the work was done, and even then it had to stand politely in a corner. Wynne had gone to the shelves. Of course he had. He moved along them with the same restrained hunger Apple had seen in him before, not greed exactly, but need shaped into discipline. He did not pull down the largest book or the one with the most obvious spellwork. He ignored 3 volumes that hummed unpleasantly when he passed. He stopped before a modest book tucked sideways between a ledger and a cracked case of scrolls. It was not too thick and not too thin. Its cover was leather, but not from any animal Apple recognized. Pale brown, smooth in some places, ridged in others, almost like skin stretched over a hidden pattern. There was no title on the spine, no clasp, no lock, nothing to announce importance. That alone made Apple suspicious. Wynne removed it from the shelf and carried it to the table. Sebastian noticed. "You were told not to touch the magic books." "I was told not to touch them until the rest of the building was empty," Wynne said. "Is it?" "The portions immediately capable of killing us appear empty." "That is not the same thing." "No." Wynne sat at the table and set the book before him. Halen watched the cover. Is it dangerous? Most useful things are dangerous. That is also not an answer, Halen said. Wynne placed his hand above the book without touching it. His fingers moved slightly, feeling for something none of the others could see. The mace fire shifted over his face, sharpening the angles of his cheekbones and leaving his eyes dark. It is a query book, he said at last. Apple pulled the cord tight on his armor. A what? A book that answers. Sebastian gave him a flat look. Books answer by being read. This one answers by being asked. Apple looked at the cover, then at Wynne. Does it talk? No. Good. We have enough things in this house with mouths. Wynne opened the book. The pages inside were blank at first, cream-colored, thin but not fragile. Then ink began to appear, flowing across the page as though written by an invisible hand moving too quickly to follow. Lines formed, paused, rearranged themselves, then settled. Wynne read in silence. His expression changed from curiosity to concentration. Halen leaned forward. What does it say? It provides information responsive to the reader's intention, Wynne said. Not from nowhere. That is important. It cannot create knowledge. It locates what has already been written elsewhere in the world and presents the relevant portion. Sebastian stared at him. That is absurd. It is magic. That explains nothing. It explains enough. Apple tied off the repair and bit the cord loose. So if I think of a question, it steals from another book? Not steals, reflects, copies, draws upon the written record. Wynne turned a page. There are limitations. It can only find what has been written down. A secret spoken and never recorded would remain hidden. Writings can also be obscured if the writer knows the proper magic. Some pages will blur. Some entries will refuse to settle. Halen's brow lowered. Who made it? Wynne read a little farther. The book does not say. Sebastian reached for the whiskey. Convenient. Wynne looked up. You do not believe me. I believe you believe it. Wynne closed the cover and slid the book across the table. Open it. Sebastian did not take it. The book sat between them. The mace fire burned. Apple stopped working. Halen watched Sebastian with patient stillness. Sebastian's hand tightened around the whiskey bottle. For a moment it seemed he would refuse simply because Wynne had offered. Then he set the bottle down, reached forward, and pulled the book toward him. What am I meant to ask? You do not have to speak aloud, Wynne said. Hold what you want to know in your mind. Then open it. Sebastian's face hardened. He opened the cover. The pages fluttered without wind. Ink spread across them in dark, elegant lines. Sebastian looked down. His eyes moved once across the top of the page, then stopped. The change in him was immediate, not fear, anger. His mouth tightened. Color rose along his neck. He gripped the edge of the book so hard the page bent under his thumb. What is it? Halen asked. Sebastian did not answer at first. Then he began to read aloud. Not calmly, not as a man sharing useful information, as a man forcing poison back through his teeth. Letter from Lord Corvin Valcor to Lord Adrian Vale. Apple went very still. Wynne lowered his gaze to the table. Sebastian read. He did not read every word with equal care. Some he spat, some he nearly swallowed. But the shape of the thing became clear enough. Lucan was dead. Sebastian had killed him. Law had been satisfied, but blood and reputation had not. Housevale could not appear diminished. House Valcor could not allow a private quarrel to weaken the order of West Haven. Sebastian's voice sharpened. I propose we solve it together. His hand trembled once. He pinned it flat against the page and continued. The letter spoke of Sebastian as a thing to be recovered, brought home, made useful. It spoke of Lana, Lord Vale's surviving child, fragile in health and valuable because of it. It did not pretend at romance. It did not waste ink on sentiment. A marriage between Sebastian and Lana would bind the houses. It would compensate House Vale publicly. It would turn Lucan's death into an alliance. If Lana survived long enough to bear a child, that child would carry Vale inheritance and Valcor blood. Sebastian paused there. The room was silent, except for the low burn of the mace. Apple could see the muscle working in Sebastian's jaw. He read on. As for House Valcor, Julien will govern its future. That sentence changed the air more than the others. Sebastian looked at it for several long seconds before continuing. His father's letter explained that Julien had already begun assuming the duties and authority that would become his by right. Sebastian's place was no longer in succession. His value lay elsewhere. The marriage would give him a purpose that served the house rather than embarrassed it. The final lines came colder. Sebastian read that his father wanted the matter handled quietly. No public declaration, no formal negotiation until Sebastian was found and returned. Then the last line. Lucan's death cannot be undone, but it can be made politically useful. He stopped. He did not read the signature. He did not need to. For a moment no one moved. Then Sebastian shut the book so hard the sound cracked through the room like a pistol shot. The warning charms did not stir. The doors remained closed. Sebastian stared at the cover. Apple expected him to throw it. He did not. That restraint seemed worse. His anger had not left him, it had gone inward, pressed behind the ribs where it would do more lasting harm. Halen's voice was low. Sebastian, I am fine. No one believed him. Sebastian pushed the book away from himself as though it stank. It slid across the table toward Apple. Apple caught it on instinct, then immediately wished he had not. The cover felt warm, not warm like fire, warm like skin. He looked at the book, then at Wynne, then at the book again. No, Wynne's expression softened only slightly. You do not have to. That is correct. Apple shoved it toward Wynne. Wynne did not take it. Apple's ears flattened. Do not look at me like that. Like what? Like you know there is something I should want to know. There is always something. I know enough things. Sebastian gave a humorless sound from his chair. That must be restful. Apple ignored him. His fingers rested on the book's cover. He did not open it. His tail curled and uncurled once behind him. Wynne watched, but did not press. That somehow made it worse. Apple exhaled through his nose. I cannot read. The words landed harder than he intended. Sebastian looked over. Halen blinked once. Even Wynne seemed momentarily surprised, though he hid it quickly. Apple's defensiveness rose at once, sharp and familiar. What? He said. Do not stare. Sebastian frowned, not cruelly. You cannot read at all? I can read some marks, trademarks, warning marks, tavern signs if they have pictures. Not this. Apple tapped the cover. Not books, Halen said. Father Rancic taught me letters. Apple turned on him. Of course he did. Halen looked genuinely puzzled. Was that wrong? No, that is the problem. Sebastian leaned back, wincing as he did. I thought temple artisans would need records. Women handle letters, Apple said. He heard the roughness in his own voice and disliked it. At RU, mostly, messages, outside trade, temple records, written law, men work craft, stone, metal, setting, repair, locks. Hands remember, tails remember, eyes remember. Not everything needs marks on a page. Wynne said quietly, and no one taught you after? Apple gave him a hard look. The answer was obvious enough. After Rue there had been pirates. Chains, hunger, fear. Men who laughed when he reached for things. Men who would sooner cut off a finger than put a pen in it. Then survival, then blades, then roads, then everything else. No, Apple said. The word was small and ugly. Halen looked at the book. Perhaps it will answer in a way you understand. Apple stared at him. That is not how books work. This one is already not how books work, Halen said. That was difficult to argue with. Apple looked down at the cover again. The pale leather seemed ordinary now. Too ordinary. He hated that the others were waiting. He hated more that they were trying not to look as if they were waiting. Finally, he dragged the book closer. "If this thing mocks me," he said, "I am stabbing it," Wynne said. "That may damage the binding. I am aware." Apple opened the book. At first the pages were blank. Then lines appeared, not words. Pictures, simple ones, clear ones, drawn in black ink with small touches of red, brown, and gold. Apple leaned closer despite himself. A round shape, a crust, apples sliced thin, a bowl, a spoon, a little pile of sugar, hands folding dough. A vent cut into the top, steam rising. Another page formed beside it, meat and gravy sealed under pastry. Then one with berries. Then a small hand pie crimped at the edges. Then another with honey and nuts. Apple stared. Sebastian slowly turned his head. "What is it?" Apple did not answer. He flipped a page. More pies, a lattice crust, a deep savory pie, a sweet custard pie dusted with spice, a fish pie, a root pie, a tiny pie folded into a half moon. Each recipe unfolded in simple icons, step after step, no letters needed. Wynne leaned over just enough to see. His mouth twitched. Apple snapped the book half closed. "Do not." "I said nothing. You were about to." "I was not." "You were thinking it loudly." Halen leaned forward. "What did it show?" Apple hesitated. Then, with as much dignity as he could manage, he opened the book again and turned it toward them. Halen studied the pictures. "Food, pies," Apple said. Sebastian stared at the pages. "You asked the magic book for pies?" "I did not ask it anything." Wynne's voice was dry. "The reader's intention does not require words." Apple pointed at him. "You are enjoying this a little." Sebastian leaned closer, the first true break in his anger showing his disbelief. "How many pies can one person think about?" Apple flipped a page. Then another. Then another. The book obligingly supplied more. Sebastian looked almost offended. "That is an unreasonable number of pies." Apple's shoulders lifted. "You have your family politics. Wynne has terrible magic secrets. I have interests." Halen looked at one of the diagrams. "This one has meat." "Yes." "And fruit?" "Yes." "In the same pie?" Apple pulled the book closer. "You are not ready." For a few breaths the room eased. Not healed, not safe, not light, but eased. The mace fire burned low. The whiskey passed once more. Sebastian's anger did not vanish, but it no longer filled every corner of his face. Wynne's eyes remained shadowed, though the faint curve at his mouth stayed for a moment longer than usual. Halen looked at the pie diagrams with grave attention, as if considering whether the shaper approved of pastry. Then Apple shut the book and slid it to Halen. "Your turn." Halen did not touch it. "No." Apple raised an eyebrow. "Afraid of pies?" "No." "Afraid it will show you stew?" Halen looked at the cover. His expression had gone solemn again. "Such magic troubles me. It reaches, it takes what is written elsewhere and draws it here. It is not making, it is not shaping, it is borrowing without asking the hand that made the mark." Wynne did not dismiss that. Instead, he nodded once. "That is a fair concern." Apple leaned back. "Still useful. Many troubling things are useful," Halen said. Sebastian looked at the book with a bitter expression. "That appears to be the theme of the house." For a while, Halen only watched the cover. Then he reached out and placed one broad hand upon it. The book looked very small beneath his fingers. When he opened it, the pages fluttered more violently than they had for the others, as if caught in a hot wind. Ink spread. Not pictures this time. Words. Halen looked down. His expression changed before he read aloud. The glow in the cracks of his chest dimmed, then brightened. His hand tightened on the book, but carefully, as if afraid of crushing the answer before it finished forming. "What does it say?" Apple asked. Halen did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low and deep enough that the room seemed to hold it after each word. "Myra Block. Field Journal. Wynne went still. Sebastian shifted forward despite the pain. Halen read, "The emberkin egg is not merely a vessel. It is the battery." His voice roughened on the last word. Apple felt the change in him. Not movement, not heat, something deeper, like a forge door opening somewhere behind stone. Halen continued. Myra had written in anger. That much was clear. The entry was not polished, not meant for court or report. It was a field note written by someone frayed near the edge of patience. She complained of Malrick preening over the crucible array as if the structure itself were the achievement. It was not. The array only conducted what the egg provided. The life inside it generated the force. A deep, steady force capable of sustaining magic that would otherwise collapse under its own hunger. Halen's voice slowed. The difficulty is keeping the source alive while using it. The words entered the room like a knife set on a table. Draw too little, and Red 6 remained inert. Draw too much, and the emberlin weakened. The shell destabilized. The whole working failed. Malrick had no patience for that margin. He wanted stronger output, wider reach, faster proof. He did not understand or did not care that the thing inside had to survive long enough to be useful. This is not like his other creatures, Halen read. This needs to propagate without our assistance. No one interrupted. Apple had stopped breathing deeply, and not because of his ribs. Halen read on. Fishbrook would begin the first phase of the ritual. Venom Thicket Tower and the Elder Tree Monastery in Greenvale would complete it. Properly sequenced, the 3 points would give Red 6 its best dispersal pattern, enough to cover everything north of the Blacklands. That would be the proof they needed. Not theory, not another controlled chamber result. Field confirmation. The words meant little and too much at once. A map formed in Apple's mind, not precise but large enough to understand the danger. Fishbrook, Venom Thicket Tower, Greenvale, 3 places, a pattern laid over Solfawn like a net. Red 6 carried outward from them. Everything north of the Blacklands covered. Halen kept reading. Myra needed Malrick for now. His instincts were vulgar but not useless. He saw paths through the work others would miss, even if he lacked the discipline to walk them cleanly. She would endure his vanity, correct his errors, keep the egg alive, until Red 6 proved itself. Then, the entry made clear, she would no longer need him. Halen stopped. The echoes of his voice seemed to remain in the shelves, in the false windows, in the dust above the books. He did not shut the cover at once. His eyes remained on the page. Apple looked at the glow in his chest and saw it pulsing unevenly. Halen, Sebastian said. Halen closed the book, carefully, too carefully. They're using an emberkin egg, he said. No one offered a softer word for it. Wynne reached for the book. Halen let him take it, though it seemed to cost him something to release it. Fishbrook, Wynne said. Venom Thicket Tower. Elder Tree Monastery? Greenvale, Sebastian added. That is not close, no, Wynne said, but sequence matters. If the first phase begins at Fishbrook, that is where we go first. Apple rubbed a hand over his face. Red 6 covers everything north of the Blacklands. Covers how? Wynne's eyes lowered to the book. We still do not know. Behavior, Sebastian said. They all looked at him. He was staring at the mace fire, but his mind had gone elsewhere, back to the notes. Back to Malrick. Back to whatever pattern had been forming since the towers. Malrick's work has always circled behavior, Sebastian said. Modification, redirection, instinct, obedience. Wynne nodded slowly. Yes. Apple's throat felt dry. So Red 6 is not poison. It may be, Wynne said. But not only poison. Halen stood. The motion was slow, but the room changed with it. He crossed to the false window and stood before the black glass. His reflection looked back at him, stone body, ember seams, broad shoulders, eyes lit from within. He touched the symbol of the shaper at his chest. They took an egg, he said. His voice was quieter now. That made it worse. Apple had heard Halen angry. He had heard him in battle, roaring heat and strength into a room. This was not that. This was grief held so tightly it had not yet found its shape. "They are drawing life from it," Halen said, carefully, not out of mercy, out of use. Sebastian bowed his head. Wynn's hand rested on the book. Apple looked at the floor. For once, he had nothing sharp enough to say. After a time, Wynn opened the book again. Not to Halen's page. He focused, and the text shifted. "What are you looking for?" Sebastian asked. "Malrick." The pages blurred, then settled into several lines in a different hand. Wynn read silently first, then summarized rather than reciting. "Malrick Faust," he said. "Birthplace uncertain in these notes, though likely Solfawn. Mid-40s. Studied at Sanivor. Expelled for dangerous independent research. Long-standing interest in behavioral modification. Repeated warnings against granting him full autonomy." Sebastian's mouth tightened. Someone knew. Yes. Wynn's eyes moved across the page. Myra, Block, and Travis were assigned to him. Not as assistants only. Observers. Handlers, perhaps. The notes say they were sent to keep him under observation and focused on the assigned tasks. Apple looked up. "Travis? We have seen the name before," Wynn said. "Not enough to know his role." Halen remained by the false window. Wynn continued. "There are financial transactions routed to Malrick, significant ones. It appears he found a wealthy patron approximately 5 years ago, when this project began in earnest." "Who?" Sebastian asked. Wynn turned a page. The text blurred. He waited. It blurred again. His expression tightened, obscured. "By magic? Likely. Or no direct record exists in the sources the book can reach." Wynn tried again, then shook his head. "Not Solfawn, I think. The phrasing suggests outside money. Possibly Saint Germain." Sebastian's eyes hardened at once. "There it is," he said. Wynn did not argue. Apple looked between them. "Possibly is doing work there." "Saint Germain took his sister," Sebastian said. "My father is trying to sell me into House Vale. House Vale took Lucan's death and made it arithmetic. And now a wealthy outside patron funds Malrick while he builds obedience plagues and egg batteries under our feet." His voice lowered. "It is Saint Germain." Wynn's face had gone very still. The name House Vale had struck him too, though not for Sebastian's reasons. Apple remembered the way the book had trembled under Sebastian's hand. The anger in the letter, the careful cruelty of power arranging lives like pieces on a board. Wynn looked at the book, then he opened it for himself. This time he did not read for long before his expression changed. It did not break. Wynn was too controlled for that. But something behind his eyes went suddenly exposed. "What?" Apple asked. Wynn did not answer. He read quickly, skipping portions, gathering the shape of the thing faster than speech. Then he sat back. "My sister is alive." The words fell quietly. Halen turned from the window. Sebastian's anger shifted, redirected by the shape of Wynn's face. Apple lowered his hands from his armor. Wynn looked at the page again as if afraid it would vanish if he did not keep seeing it. "Her name is Cyrillin," he said. "Wood elf. Taken from the northeastern coast of Solfawn during a House Vale-sponsored maritime action." Sebastian closed his eyes briefly. Wynn continued, voice controlled but thin at the edges. "She was teaching orc children, letters, numbers, devotional symbols, ciphered marks they believed were associated with the Vale. When the landing party came, she ordered the children inland and resisted detention. They subdued her alive and took her aboard a ship called the Mercy of St. Cauldron." He swallowed once. "She was transferred to St. Germain, entered into a restricted patronage system at the request of House Vale. Public doc transfer prohibited. Unsupervised correspondence prohibited. No civil trial. Current placement, St. Germain, inner household circuit. Movement restricted to approved private residences, chapels, instructional rooms, and secured noble properties." Apple said nothing. Halen said nothing. Sebastian's hands had closed into fists. Wynne looked up. "She is alive," he said again. No one corrected the hope in that. Then his voice hardened. "She is caged, but alive." Sebastian leaned forward. Pain crossed his face and was ignored. "House Vale. Yes, my father wants to marry me into House Vale." "Yes." The two men looked at each other across the mace fire, and something passed between them that had not been there before. Not friendship. Not yet. Something more severe, recognition perhaps, the knowledge that the same distant power had put its hand into both their lives and squeezed. Wynne closed the book but kept his palm on the cover. "When we were young," he said, "she followed me everywhere." Apple listened. Wynne's gaze had shifted past the room, past the shelves, past the hidden house. "I was older. Not by much, but enough that I believed it mattered. I was supposed to know paths before she walked them. I was supposed to hear danger first." She laughed too easily, trusted too quickly. She thought every child should know letters, every old story should be kept, every border was only a place where people had stopped speaking clearly. His mouth tightened. "She went north and east to teach among the orc families near the coast. I was studying under Master Loden then. Lorekeeper training, books, memory, law, old songs. A messenger came. He said a ship under Saint Germain authority had made landing. Sir Halen stayed behind so the children could run." The mace fire shifted softly. Wynne looked down at his hand on the book. "I was not there. The room held that too. I have carried that absence since," he said. "Every year made it heavier. I thought she might be dead. Some days I hoped she was because the other possibilities were worse. But now—" He did not finish. Apple understood anyway. Alive could be mercy. Alive could be another kind of cruelty. Sebastian's voice was rough. "We can go to Saint Germain." Wynne looked at him. "Not tonight," Sebastian said, "not wounded and blind. But we can go, we can find her." Halen stepped back toward the fire. "We must stop Malrick first." Sebastian's jaw tightened, but he did not argue immediately. Apple did. "If Red 6 does what we think it does, and they begin at Fishbrook—" "I know," Sebastian said. Wynne's hand remained on the book. "Halen is right." The admission clearly cost him. "My sister has survived this long," Wynne said. "If we abandon Malrick now, many more may not." Sebastian looked down at the dented piece of his armor on the floor. "I hate that this is true," he said. "So do I," Wynne replied. "The whiskey passed again after that. Not for comfort, for function." They repaired armor in silence. Apple finished the patch at his ribs, then helped Sebastian tie off a split strap he could not reach without twisting. Halen examined the dented breastplate and heated part of it in his hands. Not enough to melt, but enough to soften the metal. He pressed carefully from within, reshaping it by force and patience. The metal groaned under his grip. Apple watched him work. "Can you fix all armor that way?" "No. Can you fix mine? Leather burns." Apple looked down at his patched side. "Unhelpful." "Yes." That was the closest they came to humor for a while. Wynne continued testing the book. He searched for Malrick's missing years and found little. In his 20s, Malrick had vanished from the records available to the book for a period of several years. In his 30s, he had returned to finish portions of study, though the notes described him as brilliant, undisciplined, and more interested in his own work than any assigned course. Again and again the same pattern emerged: dangerous talent, poor obedience, useful results, handlers recommended. "People kept choosing to use him," Wynne said. Sebastian looked up. Because he was useful, no one missed the echo of his father's letter. Wynne tried again for the patron. The book gave fragments, transaction references, obscured seals, hints of intermediaries, nothing direct. The more precise the question, the more the page blurred. "Someone protected themselves," he said. Saint Germain, Sebastian said. Likely, Wynne said. From Wynne, that was nearly agreement. At last he leaned back and rubbed his eyes. Apple looked at the book. Can we take it? Wynne lowered his hand. No. Apple's ears lifted. No, we cannot, or no, we should not. The magic is bound to this room, or perhaps to the shelf, or the structure beneath it. I felt the boundary when I set the alarms. The book may physically leave, but it will become only a book. Blank, likely, or locked to whatever last page it held. Apple frowned at it. So it is useful only here. Yes, that is poor design. It may be intentional, still poor. Wynne's fingers rested along the cover with something close to admiration. It is extraordinary. It is inconvenient, Apple said. Both can be true. Halen returned Sebastian's breastplate to him. The dent was not gone, but it was better. Sebastian took it with a nod and began refitting the straps. His motions were stiff. He looked older than he had in the morning. They settled eventually into something like rest. Not sleep, not yet. The room had too many books. The doors had too many possibilities behind them. The house had too much breath left in its walls. Apple wrapped his patched armor close and leaned against a crate near the mace fire. He touched his pouch once, checking the sugar cubes without looking. 6 of them. Perfect. Still there. Sebastian sat with his back to the wall and his sword across his knees. His eyes remained open. Whether he was thinking of his father, Julien, Lana, Lucan, or Housevale, Apple could not tell. Perhaps all of them, perhaps none. Sometimes anger became too crowded to name its contents. Wynne sat at the table with the book before him. He had closed it, but had not returned it to the shelf. His face was turned slightly away from the others. In the firelight, his expression looked carved from shadow and exhaustion. Halen stood one last time and looked down at the closed book. Fishbrook, he said. Wynne nodded. Venom Thicket Tower, Sebastian said. The Elder Tree Monastery in Greenvale, Apple finished. Halen picked up his burning mace. The fire curled around the head, patient and low. He looked at the 3 of them. We leave in the morning. This is the end of episode 16 of Solfawn.